corresponding to the 17th day of November. Today's class, graciously sponsored by Mr. Maurice Chera and family. Le'ilui Nishmat, his beloved mother, Mrs. Florence Chera, Shoshana Bat Leah Alea Shalom, Iratzon, through the words of Torah, her neshama, have an aliyah in Gan Eden. Amen. Additionally, we're dedicating today's class for the refuah shelema of Yehoyada Yadav Kohen ben Faride, Eliyahu ben Simcha, Hayal Shimon Pinchas ben Rivka, and Zera Shel Kayama, Tamar Rachel bat Hannah. Needless to say, we continue praying for the well-being and welfare of our brethren of Eretz Israel. Before I begin with the class of today, we heard yesterday a shiur given in Israel in a very famous synagogue called the Musayef Synagogue. That's in Yerushalayim, I believe in Shechunat Bukharim, that many Talmidei Hachamim speak there on a regular basis. And there was a great Hacham that said in the name of one Mekubal that he did not share the name of this great sage publicly, but he says that this great rabbi is physically in the world present, but his mind and spirit, it's constantly connected to the higher levels of spirituality, which we understand there are many different levels in spiritual life. And he said the following, and I did touch on this point in the beginning of this unfortunate situation, the power of the prayer that we say every day of our life that has two words, and this is called, the words called Matir Asurim, releases the captives. This is found often in our prayers. First of all, in the Birkot HaShachar. Then you have Hallelujah, chapter 146 of Tehillim, after Ashrei. Then we have it in the Amidah, etc. So throughout the day of prayers, we've come across these words, Matir Asurim. And the great rabbi said that one of the formulas to activate the release of the captives is to concentrate in these two words. That when we come across in the prayer, Matir Asurim, take a few seconds, okay? Maybe 30 seconds, that's considered well kavanah, in these two words, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu release them immediately. Why? He said very simple, because they only got there because God put them there. What does it mean? The Pasuk says, Hashem Matir Asurim. God releases the captives. How does someone becomes a captive? Only by permission of Shamayim. Yes, physically and mentally and politically, we can justify, yeah, they came in, they did, they took, Hazaku Baruch, all that is done. But let's be honest here. And I don't want to say it publicly because I don't want anyone to misunderstand me, but I'm not going to stop the recording. One of the biggest questions that the world has, not us, the world. What happened with Israel? Army, Mossad, Shabak. What happened? I want to tell you what happened. It's a pasuk in the book of Tehillim that says, Im Hashem lo yishmor ir, shav shakat shomer, chazaku baruch. Im Hashem lo ibne vayit, shav amlu bon. Geulah is the ultimate goal, the ultimate purpose, the ultimate mission of life. So I found that yesterday very eye-opening because, as I said, how many times a day we say Matir Asurim? Many times. Just in the Amidah itself, 3 times. Shabbat, we're going to also be Nazat Avotenu, Mosi Asirim, Puede Anavim, Ozer Dalim, this is 101 prayer. You should know this by heart because we say it every day of our life. So the great rabbi said, the homework now is concentrate in these 2 words. besides all the changes and all the improvements and enhancements of our spiritual life. But this is a thing I found it to be very powerful and very meaningful. With all that being said, let's talk about this week's parasha. Because in this week's parasha, an anti-Semite is born by the name of Esav. You need to know this. Esav is the founding father of Edom, Amalek. All these names, Haman, that come across history, Agag, who was their founding father? Esav. From this week's parasha. And to tap it all off at the end of the day, what happened with Esav? Who did he marry? The daughter of Ishmael, right here. This week's Torah portion, the final verse. The pasuk says, "Vayelech Esav el Ishmael." Esav now becomes a partner with Ishmael. Vayikach et Mahalat bat Ishmael. Who does he marry? The daughter of Ishmael. Can you understand such a shidduch? Esav and Ishmael become a partner. And history proves us. And we have heard this when Rabbi Gladstein was here, that and his grandfather was an eyewitness to this, that they invited the Mufti of Jerusalem, right, to parade the Jewish victims of the Holocaust in front of him. Who was sitting next to him? Hitler. That's this pasuk. Esav and Ishmael together. That's what that story means. When the enemies make peace in order to destroy Am Israel. But do not despair. Already last week's parasha tells us that eventually Ishmael will fall. That was the final verse. I believe I said this on Sunday morning, when the pasuk says, "Al penei kol echav nafal," in front of all his brothers he will dwell. But other Mefarshim writes, "Nafal migdulato." The empire of Ishmael will collapse at the end of the day. The Baal HaTurim says the collapsing of Ishmael will be activated by the rising of Ishaq. Who are we? Ishaq. Bnei Abraham, Ishaq, and Yaakov. So the Pesukim are writing already the history of what's going on in our days. So therefore, do not despair, but do understand, Kahal Kadosh, that a lot of the things that are happening is history being written in front of us. And with that being said, I'd like to share just a handful of meaningful commentaries in this week's Torah portion. Obviously, we know the concept of Yaakov and Esav. Very basic storyline of the parasha. Ishaq and Rivka were barren for 20 years. After Rivka left the house of Lavan, her brother, and Betuel, her father, when she left, and we learned this last Friday afternoon in the class before Mincha, we quoted the Ben Ish Hai that discusses the blessing that the family of Rivka gave her before she departed. And guess what? Because that blessing came from an unholy source, so that blessing was blocked for 20 years. Not to say that the reason of the fruitfulness from Rivka came from the powers of impurity, of Tum'ah. Because as I said the other day, Rivka's father, Betuel, that's not a holy name. Betuel is a promiscuous name. That's why he was called Betuel. I'm going to tell you the reason why. The word Betuel comes from the word Betulim. Betulim is the status of a girl, of a lady that was never married or had intimate contact with another male, with a male. That's betulim. That's when you write in the ketubah. Betulta shapirta. Or depends on the status, if it's divorce, etc. So what was the madness back then? That Betuel, being like the, let's call him the mayor of the town, he enacted a rule that the night before any girl's marriage, they will have to spend time with him. So when it came the moment of Rivka, Rivka was saved. She left the same day. When they ask her, do you want to go or stay? What she says, I'm leaving. She didn't want to be violated by her own father. That was Betuel's. And I'm sorry if I'm speaking heavy early morning. He died that day after she agrees to leave, because the goal was to poison Eliezer, the way the Perashah writes. But up to that day, he was alive. That's what's called Betuel. The brother, Lavan, we learned this last Shabbat. His name was not Lavan. His name was Naval. Naval, low life. No Naval to Canada. That's a Naval. That's an airport, I think. Or a city, I don't know. But Naval, that's Laval. Naval is on Lashon Nevela. Dead animal, low life. That was the real name. And the Torah gives a title. Lavan HaArami. From Aram. His real name was Naval Haramai. Ramai means deceitful, conniving. That was the real name. So the Torah, to protect the honor of Yaakov, calls him Lavan HaArami, Whitey, Mr. Whiteman from Aram. But his real name was Mr. Lowlife, the conniving and deceitful. That's the reason why the angel in charge of distributing poverty, it's called Naval. And where does he hang around? In places that have foul smell. That's what's written in the Gemara in Pesachim, in one of the Tosafot. Doesn't matter. Let's continue. The Pasuk tells us about the contractions of Rivka. Very famous concept. Vaytrotzetzu abanim bekirba. Suddenly there was commotion in the womb of Rivka. And she explains what kind of contractions did she experience. And she gives a very beautiful explanation. And it says, every time they walk in front of a church, contractions. Every time she walk in front of a synagogue, contractions. She doesn't understand. They didn't have an ultrasound. Like today, oh, you have two babies. She didn't know she had two babies. She thought she had one child. But now she's worried. She says, do I have a child with multiple personalities? Do I have a child that is bipolar? God forbid, I'm using common words that we can relate. One day he follows godliness, the other day he follows impurity. So what did she do? The Pasuk says, Batelech lidrosh et Hashem. He went to ask a question to whom? To the Hacham. And she was told, Matchaf, shene goim bebidnech. You have two nations in your womb. Yani, you have two opposites. You have one son that's going to be a righteous, and you're going to be a son that's going to be the opposite. And what is her reaction when she's being told that what she's carrying? Thank you, Rabbi, for your blessing. Hazaku Baruch. She was happy. She was happy now. She wasn't happy 15 minutes ago. But now she says, oh, that means that they are 50-50. One son will be a great tzaddik, and one son is going to be a great rasha. Hazaku Baruch. Thank you for your blessing. How could it be? Hazaku Baruch. So I think that Rivka Imenu is teaching us a very interesting lesson in Avodat Hashem. And let me tell you that the Hida Kadosh explains that even though on the surface we find about the birth of Esav, but even from the birth of Esav, they were a handful of righteous people that came down to the world. That's what the Hida Kadosh writes. And he gives the name. It says that, for example, Antoninus, that became like a good friend to Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. Now, in Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, and Antoninus is the cloning of Yaakov and Esav. That's what the Hida Kadosh writes. It was the nitzot, the spark of the soul of Esav, reincarnated into Antoninus. That's number one. Number two, just 1 second. It says that when she was told that she's carrying 2 children, she had a bittersweet feeling. Bitter because she's being told, your son will be not a good person. But then she had a sweet feeling. Why? She says as follows: I became the great-great-grandmother of Moshe Rabbeinu. And it is true. Rivka is the mother of Yaakov. Yaakov, the father of Levi. Levi, the father of Amram. Amram, the father of Moshe. Easy. So she's very happy that Moshe Rabbeinu is coming down from her. But parallel to that, it says, Shebedorot, that later on in history, one offspring of Esav will become a convert, a ger, and will be the Habruta of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, which is the composer of the Mishnayot. Not only that, through the lineage of Ishmael, we never saw anyone converting. It is true. Even Haman from Purim. Who was the great-grandfather of Haman? Esav. Here is the lineage. Esav, Amalek, Agag, Haman. I skipped a couple of generations in between, but I gave you the main colorful characters. And yet what the Gemara says, that the grandchildren of Haman became converts and became yeshiva students in Eretz Israel. Now, how could it be that, imagine yourself, that Hitler, which is a direct descendant of Haman, has grandchildren, and now they're learning in yeshiva in Israel? Probably it happened. Probably I heard this, that it happened. But irrelevant if it happened or not. The Gemara says, you know why Haman had grandchildren that became Jewish and Torah students? That was the gift that God gave to Haman for him, Haman, causing the Jewish people to do teshuvah. That's what the Gemara writes. 2 scenarios the Gemara brings. Haman and Paro. When Paro was chasing the Jewish people, the Pasuk says, Uparo ikriv. Paro got them closer. So the question is, how can't you say got them closer? Say Paro got close. If Paro is chasing the Jewish people, So the verb should have been Paro got close to the Jewish nation. But the Mefarshim said no. Paro was responsible for bringing close the heart of the Jewish people towards God. פרעה הקריב את ליבם של ישראל לאביהם שבשמיים. Paro brought the heart of the Jew. God says, you brought my children closer because we started to pray. Ba'is'ak el Hashem. What did we do when we feel the knife on the neck? We say Shema Israel. God says to Paro, Paro, Hazaku Baruch, you help me, I owe you one. What was the gift that God gave to Paro? Gift number one, Hazaku Baruch. When it came to the splitting of the Red Sea, Paro survived. Lo nish'ar bahem ad echad, the pasuk says. Every Egyptian that went into the Nile River, no, the Sea of Reeds, or the Yam Suf rather, to chase the Jewish people, didn't make it, with one exception, Paro. And Paro is the one who says, Mi chamocha ba'elim Hashem, mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh. Paro recognized the greatness of God. And the question is, what made him? Who will not recognize the greatness of God when you are drowning? When you see all your mercenaries and all your soldiers and everyone else is drowning? Short answer is, Paro recognized one of the ultimate attributes of godliness, called midah keneged midah, measure for measure. Remember what was the decree of Paro in the beginning of Sefer Shemot? Drown the Jewish people, the boys. Who else saw this? Yitro. Yitro also heard of this. The entire world heard of this mega event of the splitting of the water. But there was one difference, that Yitro reacted about it. Yitro did something. He became part of the Jewish people. Hazaku Baruch. The rest of the world says, oh, very nice. Next. That was the difference between the world and Yitro. And that's why he has a parasha on his name. And that's why the Torah, 10 Commandments, are written in his parasha. And many other Kabbalistic matters which are not for today. Not for today. Not for today. I don't want to get carried from the topic of today. So, at the end of the day, I think I finished. That's how the Hidah concludes. But I'm sure we have also a lot of things. I'm going to switch the topic, but we're sticking in the parasha because we're going to learn something now that we do it for years. We do it for years. And today we'll discover the source of what we are doing for years. Okay? Now, I need a book. But I need a book that has what I'm looking for. No. You know the Art Scroll New Siddur Sephardic? I tell you what it is. The last narrow shelf. Go, keep going. Keep going. I'm going to give you a GPS direction. Keep walking. Keep walking. Keep walking. Keep walking. Stop. Across from the elevator, there is a narrow bookshelf to your left. Hazaku Baruch. I use that Siddur because I'm sure it has it. No, I need a Chumash. I need a Siddur. is an art to the left of those books. It could be the Art Scroll Sephardic Sidur or the Orot Sephardic Sidur. I'm sure that these two have it. The others, I'm not sure. Thank you so much. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם שהכל נהיה בדברו. I want to read you what it says before I speak. Thank you so much. Excellent. Perfecto, Professor. Beautiful. Let me turn quickly. You know, there are many levels of Kiddush that people do. There are many levels. There are people, Shalom Aleichem, Eshet Hayil, Yom HaShishi, B'Chulu HaShamayim, Chalas. There are people who say Shalom Aleichem, Eshet Hayil, some extra curriculum prayers. There is one prayer that talks about today's parasha. Today's parasha. Let me start from the beginning. And I'm going to keep it easy to understand. But I like to help the Kahal to understand why things are being made and where the source of many of our traditions are. So let me find the pasuk to read it, and then we'll explain. Bayomer, this pasuk talks about when Ishak tells Esav, bring me the food to eat so I can bless you. Rivka became aware of this, tells Yaakov, take the garments of Esav, dress up like Esav, go to your father, get your blessing. We're not discussing what happened behind the scenes. Let's go. Comes Ishak, and it says, let me feel you to see if you are my son Esav. Yaakov got close to Ishak, his father. His father touched the arms, the skin, and it says, Hakol kol Yaakov. You sound like Yaakov, but your hands, hairy, they look like the hands of Esav. Now, you ask yourself, how did Ishak realize that there is something going on in front of him? Short answer, the way that Yaakov was talking to his father. The way Yaakov talked to his father Ishak, was in a respectful way, derech eretz, kaved et avicha ve'et imecha, but he also invoked God's names in his mission. Now, Bayomer, I'm skipping some of the pesukim. Hagishali, bring to me, be'ochela, and I will eat misad beni, from whatever you brought for me, basically. Lema'an tevarechecha nafshi, for me to bless you. Bayagesh lo bayochal, Yaakov brought the food, and listen to this. Bayaven lo yain vayesht, and wine, listen to the words, was brought to him, and he drank from the wine. Basic pasuk. The concept of the wine, to drink a bit so the spirit will be uplifted. We understand that. But I'm going to read you how you should hear this pasuk from the Baal Koreh. The pasuk should be read. Bayagesh lo bayochal, bayave lo yain bayesht. There is an elongated tune in this verse of the pasuk, and this one doesn't have the ta'am properly printed in the book. If you bring me a Sukkot David Humash, the one that you brought me, the Hebrew only Sukkot David blue. Also, but it's easier for him because it's right there. He showed it to me before. Hebrew only Bereshit Sukkot David. There has Tere Ta'ame. Tere Ta'ame means double tune. Whenever, thank you so much. Excellent. Thank you so much. Hazaku Baruch. Beautiful. But I need Bereshit. Sorry. Further down in the same aisle to the right. Whenever we have extra tunes in the pasuk or in the perasha, not common, the Torah is talking to us. For example, Shalshelet, Bait Mama. Right? You don't see that ta'am often. So something the Torah is telling me. Same thing in this tune. Tere ta'ame. So let's read now. Thank you so much, Professor. Hazaku Baruch. Great job. Right here. One moment, because I still haven't tell you what I'm referring to. The pasuk writes, Bayabe darga lo double here. Tere tame right here. What is the meaning of this? We're going to put this on the side a moment. And I'm going to read a prayer that some of us recite Shabbat night before putting water into the wine. That's before. Before we say this verse, Malei yadenu bebirchotecha, listen to the prayers. Okay. And this Siddur happens to have the English, so I'm going to read it in English directly. And it says, may also be your will, Hashem, that in the merit of diluting the cup of the Kiddush wine with water, then we have Malei yadenu bebirchotecha, you fill our hands with blessings, with the riches of the gift of your hand. Okay, we say this verse before we put the water or during we putting the water. But listen now what it says. And in the merit of Yaakov, who sweetened the forces of judgment with kindness, as it written, and he brought him wine, and he drank from the perashah, that he threw water into the wine too. In your mercy and kindness, may all harsh forces and judgment be sweetened, and may you grant us good kindnesses. So where do we learn the concept of adding water into the wine? From this week's perashah. I'm going to tell you what's written, which is not in front of us. That night, what night was it? The night that Yaakov receives the beracha, Veiten lecha ha'elokim, which this is a whole topic by itself. Many of us say this prayer, Mosai Shabbat. at home or at the synagogue. And if there is one Mosai Shabbat in your life that you should say this prayer of blessing, is this Mosai Shabbat. Because this is the Shabbat of Ve'iten Lecha. So say it. Is a pasuk with a lot of blessing, can be found in all of the Sidurim, Sephardic, Ashkenazic, Hasidic, in between. In the Sephardic prayer books after Avdalah, in some Ashkenaz prayer books in the middle of Arvit of Mosai Shabbat, by the way. Now, that night was Pesach. So you have the two animals, Korban Hagiga and Korban Pesach. But we are missing the wine. Why are you going to have wine? You're bringing two offerings to your father. It's the night of Pesach. You have the masot already. So you have masa. You have the meat, the korban, Pesach, masa, umaror. Okay, forget about the maror today. You have the matzah. You have the korban. But you're missing the wine. So you know what's the meaning of this pasuk? Vayavelo, and it was brought to him. Who? The Malachim. The Malachim delivered to Yaakov Avinu yain meshumar, the wine from the creation of the world. But you have to understand, if it's wine of the creation of the world, is the wine of Seudat Mashiach. And a wine, the way we mentioned a few moments ago, and I read it again in English, and it says, and in the merit of Yaakov, who sweetened the forces of judgment with kindness, as it written, and he brought him wine, and he drank, that he threw water into the wine. To mitigate the judgment of wine, Yaakov Avinu added water to the wine. It comes from this week's Torah portion. So you already know what to say tonight in the minyan that you're going to be leading. You make the announcement. It comes with the territory. Okay, so say this Devar Torah in your home. I'm sure your wife will listen to it. So you have to say, and we'll tell you that this action that we put water into the wine, it's found in this week's parasha. That's the prayer that we say. Some of us, I don't want to say everybody, but I do say this prayer every Shabbat, having this verse in mind. The armele maya beyena, that water was added to the wine. Just 1 second. Give me just 1 second. Let me find one more thing. Just 1 second. Verse 25. The Targum Onkelos says, Be'aite lehambra, the wine was brought to him by the Malachim. We need wine on the spot. What are you going to call? Target, pickup, Instacart, Amazon Prime, 2-hour delivery. Ishak Avinu is next to you. Don't worry. Malachim deliver on the spot. Hidush. Hidush. And the prayer continues. So if you are going to check it out, this is a very excellent translation found in the Sephardic Art Scroll Sidur on the Kiddush for Friday night. The full prayer that quotes what I just discussed with the Kahal, page 428. On the English, 429, the English, on the center, like the third paragraph from the page. You can read it if you want to read it. Yeah, many Sidurim have it before the Kiddush. Now, one more thing. I said this already. I said that already. We cover all this ground. Let me check one more thing before we say Shabbat Shalom to everybody. I'm sure we have a lot of questions. Come tomorrow afternoon, we'll discuss more at length, but I wanted to deliver these two messages because they are relevant. How many people were really aware, you don't have to answer me, that the reason why we add water into the wine comes from this week's parasha? Hidush. And I'm happy. And I'm happy that you're happy. Because now we understand. I'm mimicking Yaakov Avinu. I'm cloning the action of Yaakov, basically. What Yaakov did, I'm doing the same. Unbelievable. Ve'iten lecha prayer. As I said before, if you never say this prayer on a Mosai Shabbat, this Mosai Shabbat tomorrow night, say it. At least twice a year you should say this prayer. I tell you which, actually 3 times a year. Some of us do it every week. Many people do it every week. But if there are 3 nights that you should say this prayer, I'll tell them to you. Number 1, to Mosai Shabbat of this parasha. Because Ve'iten lecha ha'elokim mital hashamayim is from this week's Torah portion. So that alone is a zechut. Second time, Perashat Ekev. I believe that's where many of the pesukim of Ve'iten lecha are coming from. I'm 98% sure. We'll wait till that parasha comes. Third night, Mosai Rosh Hashanah. When you finish the holiday of Rosh Hashanah, that night, the first hour of the night, is when the world of finances starts distributing blessings to mankind. So when you say this prayer, you are activating additional sources of blessing. Because you are quoting the same Besukim of Beracha from the Torah, Nevi'im, Ketubim. Look in the Siddur. Easy to follow, easy to understand. And if the Hebrew is too complicated, can I have that Siddur a minute? Thank you. I want to confirm that it has right here. Beautiful. It has it all. Page 740 in the Hebrew. And the reason why we say these verses every Mosai Shabbat is because Mosai Shabbat is the beginning of a new week. And you want blessings. Correct? Many people say it at the synagogue with friends. Some people say it with their wife at home. Some people say it by themselves. The bottom line is, doesn't take long. Shouldn't take more than 5 minutes. But it has a compilation, I believe, of verses from the Torah, Nevi'im, Ketubim, and all blessed verses of blessings, of success, of salvations, of happiness, of remedy against sadness, God forbid, and sighing and painful feelings. So it's a multi-purpose blessing, not only for the physical and the financial, but actually for the emotional. Those are the 3 components that you are able to find in the Pesukim of the Berachot that Yaakov Avinu receives from Ishak Avinu in this week's parasha. So I believe that for today, we are going to say to everyone, Shabbat Shalom Mevorach. Thank you again for the Chera family for graciously sponsors today's class. La'ilu Nishmat, their beloved mother, Mrs. Florence Chera, Shoshana Bat Leah. Her neshama have an aliyah in Gan Eden. And Be'ezat Hashem, for those here, we'll see you later on Shabbat. For those virtually, We'll be back, God willing, Sunday morning, and Shabbat Shalom to everyone. ברוך אדוני לעולם, אמן ואמן. רבי חנניה בן הקשיא אומר, רצה הקדוש ברוך